an outline for the 9/11 Commission report, which was released in July of 2024. And in early March of 2023, this timeline was put together with all of the chapter headings and subheadings of the Commission report, which were very prescriptive in terms of what the Commission would find before they even began to have an investigation. There were people who were involved in placing bets that these airline stocks would go down, and so $2.5 million or more was made by people who were trading, and some of them were connected to someone called Buzzy Conrad, who was connected to the CIA recently before at that time.
Watch Federal Post. Bold and independent.
Hello, welcome to Talking Politics. This is Hassan Zafar. This is our 5th program in the series of whistleblowers, 9/11 whistleblowers. And today, our guest is Ray McGinnis. Ray has written this book, The Unanswered Questions. And Ray, thank you very much for joining. 10% questions were answered in the official report of the Commission. And the remaining 90% questions that remain unanswered, what do you have to share with us?
Yes, and actually, it's a little tiny bit worse because it's only 9% of the questions. The families who were asking the questions, that were loved ones that they lost people during the events of September 11th, and they came to draw up what would be over 1,000 questions and subsets of questions to ask the government to what became the 9/11 Commission, which if it hadn't been for these families, there never would have been a quote investigation, which is really political theater. But they asked these questions. 9% of the questions were answered. 70% were not answered, full stop. 21%, we could say, in quotes, were touched upon. I'll give you an example of one of the questions that was touched upon. Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, was asked at one point when he was testifying, "Mr. Rumsfeld, did you order planes to be scrambled to defend the Pentagon?" And he answered the question in this way. He repeated the question back to the commissioners, looked at the drapery, the wall fixtures, the ceiling fixtures, and then Tom Keene, the chairman of the 9/11 Commission, banged his gavel and said, "Time's up, next question." So you could say that Donald Rumsfeld technically answered the question by repeating it back, but he never addressed the question at all. So
it was hard.
Yeah.
I wouldn't count it as an answered question.
Yeah. So and I want to say too, like the families, the dozen people who made up the Family Steering Committee for the 9/11 Independent Commission, the majority of those, at least from those who spoke to the press, voted for Republican President George W. Bush. They expected the government to have a transparent investigation and do the right thing and make the nation safe and learn whatever lessons they need to learn from. Patty Casaza, whose husband John died in the North Tower, said that, and she was a nurse with a young infant. She said, "We expected the president to be our biggest ally, but we ended up finding out he was one of our biggest adversaries. Obstruction all the way." And so, what my book is about is it chronicles the effort of these families to try and have an investigation. They want to have things like the commission at first wants to have Dr. Henry Kissinger as the chair, and Dr. Kissinger has a long history of keeping state secrets. He's been involved with the coup in Chile with Allende in 1973 and so on. And the families have a meeting with Dr. Kissinger and ask some tough questions, and he resigns the following day. But then they end up having Lee Hamilton, who's a member of Congress for a Democrat for a long time. He's been involved in the October surprise back with Iran and Reagan in 1980 with the release of the hostages, and also with the Iran Contra scandal with Oliver North. And he said to the press numbers of times, you know, he looked Oliver North in the face and he trusted him. And Lee Hamilton is one of the people before the commission starts. He's arguing against having anyone subpoenaed, any documents subpoenaed from the National Security Agency, the FBI, the CIA, etc. He doesn't want to do that because he thinks that he doesn't want to want to upset the White House. So this is the part of the kind of thing that's going on. And I want to add too that they had this guy Philip Zelikow, who is the executive director, who is really kind of behind the scenes running everything. And there was a document, an outline for the 9/11 Commission report, which was released in July of 2024. And in early March of 2023, this timeline was put together with all of the chapter headings and subheadings of the commission report, which were very prescriptive in terms of what the commission would find before they even began to have an investigation. And so it was really a setup from the start.
Yeah. So what were the key questions that remained unanswered?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, the questions like they, why was NORAD, not involved with the proper protocols was one of the questions the families wanted to ask. Normally, throughout the history since the North American Air Defense was set up in the 50s, whenever a plane, private commercial plane, went off course from its approved flight path by more than 2%, because you can often have 4,000 or more planes up in the air over domestic airspace in America. And so if a plane normally goes off 2% off of its approved path, fighter jets are scrambled to go up on either side of that plane that's in distress, supposedly, and then they bring the plane down, whether the pilot is sick or there's malfunctioning and so on, and figure out what's happening. And on September 11th, 4 planes went up in the air and none of them were intercepted. And so that is a huge red flag. And you have the behavior of General Ralph Eberhart, who's a key person within command, and he's watching things from his base in Wyoming, I think, and he's saying, or Colorado, and he was saying he's watching, once the second tower has been hit, north and south towers, he announces that he thinks that things have, quote, quieted down. And so he goes off for a 45-minute drive into some parkland. And so the behavior of, so one of the questions was the behavior of all of the key people in key positions on that day that are supposed to be involved in Americans' air defense of a $750 billion at the time budget. They were all doing things that you would not expect them to do, actually the opposite. And so that's another one of the questions. But why are all the key people not responding in the way that they would be expected to be responding in? Another question was, why were there stock trades on key airlines and involved in what happened with the buildings and the Pentagon? There were people who were involved in placing bets that these airline stocks would go down, and so $2.5 million or more was made by people who were trading, and some of them were connected to someone called Buzzy Conrad, who was connected to the CIA recently before at that time. So that's another one of the questions about the timing. You know, who would be in a position to benefit and to know that there would be such an event that would happen on the 11th of September.
Yes. I talked to Dr. Kevin Barrett, who is an architect.
Yeah.
Previous interview with him. And he talked extensively about Building 7.
Yeah.
But the mystery surrounding this Building 7, why it was demolished, what is your opinion about it after the Twin Towers? The next is this Building 7 that was destroyed, that came down, and there is plenty of evidence to believe that it was some professional demolition material that was used for destroying these buildings.
Yes.
What is your opinion about it?
Yes, this is another one of the questions that the families were interested in getting an answer to that got no answer. There was a team of engineers led by Dr. Leroy Halsey at the University of Alaska, who did an investigation into the National Institutes of the NIST report that said, oh, well, this is the way buildings fall. There was one beam that was off kilter, and so the whole thing fell down. And the university engineering team report found that no, there was no way that the government report could ever explain how the building came down in free fall in 7 seconds. There was no reason with the small fires in the 47-story tower World Trade Center Building 7 to come down at all. And so you know, there were clearly demolition materials planted in the building for it to come down. And suspiciously, as maybe other guests have pointed out, there are people on the BBC pointing out 20 minutes before the building fell, they were reporting the building had already fallen. And there were actually other, I think CNN is one that I cite in my book. They were reporting as early as 10:45 a.m. Earlier in the day, long before the collapse at 5:20 p.m., that the World Trade Center Building 7 had collapsed. So there were people in the media in the know that were telegraphing this was going to happen, you know, in error. They didn't have their script all together. So that's you know, I mean, very suspicious.
Did you get enough or sufficient support from the US media, CNN, Fox News, other channels? Were they interested in bringing this truth forward?
No, I had an interview with, I think, Russia Today, and I had an interview with a TV show in Mexico, and I did have over 100 interviews on what I would call the alternative press in the States. So small podcasts, small radio shows, but nothing mainstream at all. Because in my book, one of the questions the families asked was, they had questions about reports of explosions in the towers, and I had gone to the trouble to read through the, I think, nearly 12,000 page testimonies of 503 firefighters who were reporting in the months following the events of September 11th to their superior officers about what had happened when they went into the buildings to rescue people. And as often as not, there were also FBI agents present at numbers of these interviews. And what 118, 120 of the first responders volunteered, because they were never asked a question like, did you witness any bombs exploding or secondary devices going off in the building? But in the middle of their testimony, they would volunteer, oh, and by the way, I was thrown 50 feet down a hallway up in the air, or there was a bomb in the elevator, or you know, things like that were going on. And so I go into the, you know, the very detailed description of all of these firefighters and paramedics. And so this is, again, very explosive, pardon the pun, information that should be of interest to the U.S. media and to the government, because the first responders were held up as the heroes of September 11th.
Yeah.
Anyone.
You're saying that the script for the official narrative was already in place before the 9/11 took place, and that is what the mainstream US media has continued to endorse, and it has systematically, deliberately hushed up other possibilities, other voices.
Yes, I mean the best, maybe the best recent hope would be that on the Tucker Carlson show. Now he's not still on Fox, but he does have a following, and Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, a sitting senator in the U.S., was asking questions about Building 7, for example, not coming up, not trying to offer answers, but just saying because of things like that, there should be a new investigation. Now, right away, there are members of Congress from New York State that are saying, how can he do this? He's going to upset the families. But ironically, many of the families themselves want these questions addressed, and they want to have a new investigation. But yeah, it's the mainstream media in the States does not want this looked into.
It's been nearly 24 years now since the 9/11 happened. Now, if the investigation reopens and the alternative truth comes out, the real truth, the truth comes out, what will that change? Because a lot has happened since then. The entire narrative built around this war on terror and the demonization of the Muslims, a lot has happened since then. What will change now if the truth comes out?
If the truth comes out, it will be believed by more people if it's told on official. I mean, I'm trying to imagine a CNN broadcast where they say breaking news: the government was involved in the events of September 11th and complicit and so on. That kind of a news story. There'll be people who will accept that, but there'll be other people, and I think many people watching a newscast like that will be in denial. And I want to mention something that maybe relates to what happens when you tell the truth, the unvarnished truth. There have recently been, in April and May of this year, I think congressional testimony regarding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on 22nd of November 1963. And there have been people like Abraham Bolden, who was the first African-American Secret Service agent, testifying about the odd behavior of the Secret Service, not keeping the president safe on that day, and other people involved with the Assassinations Review Board and so on, all testifying about really damning information that would surely suggest government involvement in the assassination of their own president. But I've noticed, like I stumbled upon this just a few days ago, and I thought, isn't it interesting? This is really bombshell news, but it's not been covered in the mainstream, at least, well, certainly not up at the CBC in Canada where I live. And so when you can even have a congressional investigation, you can have a Senate committee, have key witnesses come forward and say really important things that point the finger at what really went on. And the media might choose not to report it, or if they do, they will somehow spin it in a way that makes the whistleblowers look bad yet again.
Have you personally experienced any problems being a whistleblower yourself? Because the previous 4 gentlemen I interviewed, they have experienced serious problems in their own right. For example, Carl Schwarz is living in oblivion. He cannot reveal his place of stay. He spoke to me with a very heavy VPN, which also compromised the audio video quality of this interview. He is, according to him, there have been assassination attempts. Captain Dan Hanley, the one who is responsible for bringing us together, he lost his gratuity. Another gentleman, he is blacklisted from teaching in the American colleges and universities. What has happened to you?
So I'd be in a slightly different category than these people, because unlike Captain Dan Hanley, I'm not a pilot that knows so. And I'm not a first responder who ran into the building. I'm not an FBI agent or so on. But I'm a chronicler of what the families did through their public efforts to have an investigation. So what I would say is that largely I'm ignored. So, well, here's, I'll just take a sip of water.
Sure.
My book came out on September 10th, 11th of 2021. The first review of my book on Amazon was 1 out of 5 stars. Now, it happened like within 10 minutes of my book being available, and it was kind of a review saying I didn't know what I was talking about. But nobody would have had time to purchase my book and read the whole book in 10 minutes. So, but there are whether it's algorithms or people involved in following, when a new book comes out, whatever the topic that has a dissenting point of view, there are ways in which the government and its accessories make sure that a book or commentator is panned, so that people will know not to look at that book.
Yeah, because Barbara Honegger, when I put her interview up on YouTube, we got some not warnings, but it was very, very clear that the YouTube did not like it. So the same happened with your book when you put it on Amazon. So there is some algorithm, or there are some people who are watching that no alternative version or any other version of the story comes out.
That's right, because there are questions that I'm asking, like how come all the debris of the towers was taken away, 98% of it, within the next numbers of days, without anybody being able to look at it for forensic evidence in a crime scene. So that, there are things in my book that clearly people in positions of power don't want the general public to be thinking about.
And nobody wondered that how did all the debris turn into very fine powder, and how did that happen?
Yes.
Not a matter of concern for anybody. What kind of explosion could have turned the entire building into powder?
Exactly. I mean, this is and this whole thing raises the problem. I mean, we're dealing with propaganda here in the West, and probably everywhere. But
this brings us to the question of why, how, and who.
Yeah.
Why did it happen? Who did it? And how did it happen? We know the how part quite a lot now.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
who were the people involved in it, in your understanding?
Yeah. So this is where I would point to suspicions of what family members commented on in subsequent efforts to have investigations in the city of New York, for example, in the late 2000s. There is a person called Brian Jenkins who was with the Rand Corporation, and in the 19, and he was also part of the Green Beret and in the Dominican Republic and Vietnam as well, and he he talks about how terrorism is theater, and he's somebody who discusses how he wants he wants to he wants to have if you have a terrorist activity, that the state can be involved in terrorist activities to really shape national conversations, and so people like him and Zbigniew Brzezinski talking about how we need a new Pearl Harbor. He had a book called The Grand Chessboard that came out in the late 1990s, and connected to people in the Council of Foreign Relations and people who are involved in the Project for a New American Century, all eager for a new American military dominance in the 21st century. So I think that the people who we'd want to ask, those that are still remaining and alive, that could be sitting before a court or an investigative body, would be some of the people who were, some of the families were saying, like Patty Casaza, whose husband John I mentioned earlier, was saying, she'd want to have people like Dick Cheney and others who were saying that having an attack would be a good thing. Why would Zbigniew Brzezinski think that having a devastating attack like a new Pearl Harbor be a good thing for Americans? So these are the people who need to be asked the questions. So I think that there's a very compelling case. I think with the families that I have written about, they're kind of dancing something like, it's a bit of a tightrope walk for them, because if they come out and say, there's a game called Clue where people with board game, if Dick Cheney did it in the drawing room with a candlestick, then the media is going to say, oh, you've already decided ahead of time, before we have a new investigation, who's guilty. So they can't say that. What they can say is, here's a list of people that we would like to have come in front of a new body. And unlike the 9/11 Commission, I want to add, the 9/11 Commission is political theater. Sometimes they would have women coming before, and the commissioners have 5 minutes each of the 10 commissioners to ask the key questions, and they'd be filling up their 5 minutes saying, ma'am, that's a lovely hairdo you've got. That's a really great pair of slacks you're wearing, and a lovely coat. Or when Rudolph Giuliani, the mayor of New York, who did all kinds of suspicious things, and who predicted that the buildings would fall 15 minutes before they did. Lee Hamilton was joking with him about how he's an old Midwesterner himself, and filling up time, doing icebreakers that maybe you could do if you had an hour or three, but they didn't. And so these are the people that need to come before a body to answer the tough questions that were never asked during the 9/11 Commission.
Why hasn't the US Senate taken any kind of interest in reopening the investigation? If not the White House or the establishment, the congressman and the US Senate, nobody came forward to support the reinvestigation or opening of this case.
Yes, well, there have been a few voices over the years. One of them was Senator Paul Wellstone, a Democrat in Wisconsin. And in the fall of 2002, he was making noises publicly about having an investigation. At that point, the families hadn't even been successful to try and have one that ended up being political theater. And Vice President Dick Cheney told Wellstone in his office, if you keep pushing for an investigation, there will be severe consequences for you and the people of Minnesota. And as it happens, Paul Wellstone was in a small plane crash 7 days before what would have been his Shirley re-election in early November of 2002. So there are it seems severe consequences for numbers of people. I mean, Kurt Weldon, who was a congressman, who's recently again been asking for a new investigation, and he was a Republican, but he was asking questions in the early to mid 2000s, suddenly found himself in a political circus in the media, and he didn't get reelected, although he was very popular. But it was like a setup that there were people, powerful people, that didn't want him.
Speaking up.
Yeah.
There are serious consequences for speaking up against the official story. Is that what we can conclude?
Yes, there are very serious consequences. Some very plausibly result in death. Others the ruin of your political career, or if you're in the media, you get.
Or anything else can go wrong with you.
Yeah.
Right. So the whole system is involved in protecting the official narrative. The government, the establishment, the media, and if you allow me to say, the US parliamentarians too, both congressmen and the senators. Or they have been hushed up, whosoever, even if they wanted to speak about it, they know the consequences, so they wouldn't.
Yes, it's I think it's a very steep hill to climb because through the selection and the process of primaries, people running for congressional seats and Senate seats, if you end up having somebody who has said something about wanting a new investigation into September 11th, suddenly they'll find another candidate running against them in that primary, and they'll likely be defeated because suddenly somebody who's a virtual nobody ends up having millions of dollars behind them in an ad campaign, and the sitting member of Congress or Senate finds themselves not proceeding.
Makes the whole who question even more curious, because who is that who is so powerful that can hijack the whole system in the United States? Everything.
Well, according to the official story, I mean, the 15 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia out of the 19. Now, there was a CIA office and connected to an embassy, and apparently, you have the CIA wanting to fast track it. I mean, I think that you have people that are setting things up to happen. I mean, I'll say one thing that connects again to the JFK. We know that Lee Harvey Oswald was not the person that killed President John F. Kennedy. And before he was shot by a guy called Jack Ruby, Lee Harvey Oswald said, "I'm just a patsy." So Patty Casaza, whose husband John died in the North Tower, has said that she believes the hijackers, whatever you want to say about whether there were any or not, the hijackers were, quote, patsies. So she doesn't believe that they were, in charge of what was going on. And I think that Dan Hanley, with his, autopilot, that anybody who was in charge of the planes were not anybody who was on the plane. So that, I mean, there are people connected to intelligence, people connected to military, some people in maybe the State Department and other powerful players, business interests, perhaps defense contractors, that all would need to be looked at.
Yeah, because there are several stories that converge into one point. The autopilot theory and the demolition theory, the professional demolition of the buildings, the swapping of the planes in the air theory, and now the key questions missing out from the investigation. And there is a constant reference in all the stories to the Pearl Harbor and JFK case, which you believe were false flags.
Yes.
For the false flag, and JFK assassination was a false flag, and thereafter this 9/11 was a false flag. Is
Yeah,
that
well,
what?
I've read a book about the Pearl Harbor, and certainly the people who were in Washington D.C. in key positions knew the Japanese fleets and planes were coming toward Hawaii. The only people who didn't know that were the key commanders in the Pacific. They were going to the commanders of the Pacific Fleet thought, well, we know there's all this kind of tension with Japan. Maybe we should send our fleet heading north of Hawaii. And then they were ordered, no, you bring them back to Pearl Harbor. So so there were people who anticipated that something would be happening, and they were not the people who were in the command in the Pacific. So and even placing that fleet, moving them from Southern California to Hawaii, was also just not what you would want to do in a defensive posture. So there's lots of problems with, and certainly yes, people knew ahead of time, and heads should have rolled, but they didn't.
So what appears to be similar amongst all these false flags, that they were quite clumsily carried out.
Yes, well, I think
in the sense that the stories built around these false flags, they are not plausible stories.
Yes, there are lots of things that leak out, and then people will ask questions, and then the people who ask questions get faced with having to talk to people who've been propagandized. I've talked to an architect in my own city, who I explained about the buildings the towers falling in less than 10 seconds, and the other building, and he's even read my book. However, he maintains that the towers fell because there were no internal columns in the buildings, which is not true. But he read something like that in shortly after, in September of 2001. And so people who have a worldview will refuse to consider whistleblower information because it's too devastating to the world that they understand that they're living in. If you're an American citizen, you believe that you get up and say the Pledge of Allegiance every day since you were in grade school, and then you find out that someone's suggesting that your own government was involved in killing American citizens. This is really rocks your whole world, and so a choice that many people make is, I just don't want to believe that, and so they carry on.
Are you saying they want to believe the official narrative because believing the other story or believing or confronting the truth will be too devastating for them psychologically?
Yes, I know firefighters who have tried to be whistleblowers, and like they'll be talking to even family members, relatives or friends that they've known, and the person will listen, and then they'll say, well, I'm not going to believe that, because if I did, my world would fall apart.
Yeah, because it's really easy to remain in to live with the story that you have always believed in. Okay, one last thing. Why would someone do that kind of thing? What was achieved through this? Maybe if we can determine the objectives of this whole thing, maybe we can have some idea about who did it, who has actually benefited.
So yes, Hassan, the outcome has been the war on terror. It has been a restriction of civil rights. People are surveilled on levels that was unthinkable before September 11th. There is been a great benefit to arms manufacturers that get to give make the new bombs and the new planes and ships and so on that are needed by the U.S. government to defend itself against all of the countries that it thinks are involved in being the enemy. And it also has then prevented the flourishing of real democracy in America and in all manner of other countries, because now all kinds of resources are devoted to being afraid of something based on the lie that's been told to start the whole thing off.
Yeah, to keep the people on a kind of alert level, oscillating between yellow and red line, the yellow alert, red alert, and then green pause for a while. That kind of.
Yeah. I mean, to this day, if you go through an airport, and whether in the United States or Canada or many other countries, you're taking off your shoes, you're taking off your belts, and taking off your watch, wrist, anything.
Everywhere now. That's everywhere now.
Yeah.
You go to any airport in the world, you have to take off your shoes and belt and watch and whatnot. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy anywhere now. Well, thank you very much, McGinnis, for your time today, for sharing your thoughts with us. Is there anything you would like to share before we close this conversation for today?
I think that one thing I would add is that there are certainly family members that have accepted the official story because again they want to, or they believe in their government. There are other family members who have pushed for a new investigation, and they would still want one, but they're the ones who are sidelined and who are often silenced or ignored. And so when in the media says that any new investigation would upset the families, your viewers should know that it would actually gladden. Many families would be glad if there was a new investigation.
That's totally ridiculous that we don't want to reopen the investigation because it would upset the families of the bereaved families. So, really, how ready is the present government Trump administration for reinvestigation? Do you see any hope?
Well, I understand that former Congressman Kurt Weldon is in discussions with some people, and I'm not sure how high up. And then Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican from Wisconsin, is speaking to Tucker Carlson and a few other So there are more encouraging signs that there are some people who are raising that flag of the promise of a new investigation. I guess the Trump administration, in the midst of all that's going on with the COVID pandemic and trying to deal with that, is going to decide about that. But I mean, they are dealing with hearings about what happened with the assassination of President Kennedy, much as that's not being reported much in the news. So maybe they will show some courage and have some investigation, and then we'll see if the media covers that kind of investigation.
I hope so. Thank you so much, Ray McGinnis, for your time, for sharing your thoughts with us, and thank you very much for watching. There's a lot more to come in this series. Take care of yourself. Good night.